You can't understand me because it might cut out or something, which is unfortunate, but I don't think it likes all these debate rounds that I've had. So, if everybody's ready, I will go ahead and start. All right. Advantage one is terrorism. Terrorism is persistent and dangerous. U.S. counterterrorism responses invigorate terrorism in the Middle East and North Africa. Hayes 21. Every government has introduced screening procedures that make it difficult for would-be terrorists to gain access to airports. Terrorism has continued in the Middle East, Africa, as opposed to isolated 9/11 cell attacks. The major powers terrorism is still in killing the head of the organization's built on military victories, give way to widespread violence and civil war. And U.S. troops empirically sustain terrorism in the Middle East. Cattleman 19. Several states experienced few to no attacks before contributed only see significant judge after military deployments and negative binomial regression with fixed effects. Military participation leads to rate of frequency of terrorist attacks with twofold, which is very substantial. Leads to support for the backlash hypothesis. Troops is positive and significant. Transnational terrorism now rate an increase. Military violence leads to retaliatory attacks against contributing states. The retaliatory strategy is capable of producing significant long-term effects on a state's foreign policy. And the Middle East is adopting increasingly insecure nuclear policies that make terrorism, nuclear acquisition, and detonation increasingly likely. Odimi and Bakashimi 21. There are many insecure countries in the Middle East that plan to build nuclear facilities. With the presence of terrorists in Israel, there can be no nuclear security countries. If our relationship with terrorist groups in the Middle East will become the center of global nuclear activities with the threat of terrorist organizations seeking nuclear materials for their own purpose, susceptibility to miscalculations. Terrorists are likely to use nuclear weapons. Terrorists can produce nuclear weapons. They have enough high enriched plutonium and uranium. Al Qaeda's relationship with Pakistan's nuclear scientists, nuclear power plants in Yemen provides access to stored radioactive materials for terrorist. ISIL forces have seized control of any pounds of enriched uranium. And terrorism causes destructive global nuclear war. Barry's 19. Terrorism could spark a full-scale nuclear war, include nuclear explosive detonate. The government initiates strikes against stronghold allies, retaliate before long. The entire region is of blaze. Conflict is escalated. All countries suffer unprecedented destruction. A chain reaction could ensue. Moment that involve every nuke on the planet. Total obliteration. A nuclear war would have permanent irreversible consequences. Be true for a limited nuclear war. Advantage two is counterbalancing. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is beginning an inevitable policy of offshore balancing. However, accelerating a reduction in troops is the best method of quickly and effectively balancing against threats. Ahmed 21. No country can attain global hegemony due to the difficulty projecting and maintaining power throughout the globe. Powerful countries attain regional hegemony and prevent the emergence of other regional hegemons by observing U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. One can argue the U.S. has been trying to consolidate its armaments by constructing Russia. The U.S. is recalibrating its foreign policy priorities for centuries ahead. A country cannot be a hegemon if it's not. In order to ongoing policy shifts, the U.S. more time to focus on China's rise rather than spending billions. The policy of offshore balancing will preserve the pet to China. Afghanistan will be Achilles heel for Chinese growing power. And otherwise, the U.S. risks nuclear, EMP, and cyber attacks. Pine 21. There is an increasing threat of a two war with Russia and China stemming from their increasing superiority over the U.S. in terms of nuclear and cyber attacks. America now faces uncomfortable choices and desperate need of a new grand strategy. U.S. leaders must replace the pursuit of hegemony with strategic retrenchment. Offshore balancing. A strategic retrenchment will reduce the risk of war with America's nuclear superpower adversaries. Great power war would expose the U.S. nuclear EMP attack. A scaled back U.S. military would have greatly reduced the impotence for Russia and China to ally with each other. America would finally abandon its global war on terror, which wasted trillions for fruitless counterinsurgency wars. The U.S. would finally pursue modernization and rebuilding. And even small nuclear launches leads to extinction. Mills 14. DNA damage is 33% ozone depletion, destabilization genetic declines, including nitrogen fixation with sand bacteria, produced phytoplankton, significant pressures, the global food security, severe shortage, global nuclear famine, ice and thermal mass albedo, 26 years after nuclear war, severe negative consequences, only 100 of the smallest nuclear weapons in modern megacities, perils to humans and setting other forms of life on Earth. And cyber warfare leads to extinction. Hirsch 18. Cascading chain reactions quickly spin out of control, causing cataclysm, destroying all life on Earth. There's one domain by found control, destructive change of the internet and connected computer cyber attacks systematically escape targeted detonations, basically collateral damage. Too many fuses are highly interconnected network, 10 billion vulnerable devices, not cataclysm of our time rapidly, exponentially going uncontrollable. And EMP attacks are existential. Van Dunk 20. An electromagnetic pulse is a high-intensity burst of energy caused by radiation or nuclear weapons. 30-mile altitude detonation would affect the U.S., Canada, and Central America. EMP would cause catastrophic damage. The damage would amplify succeeding strike. The combination would cause irreversible damage. EMP attack is an existential threat as 90% of the U.S. population could be killed. Plan text. The United States federal government should withdraw all combat troops used for counterterrorism operations. Solvency. The plan solves. It allows the U.S. to incrementally remove troops from the Middle East and enhance stability. Sweeney 20. Such a plan's focus would be complete severing of U.S. military presence. The first year would address deployments withdrawal as most immediately needed active combat zones, totaling just under 9,000 troops. The U.S. should proceed to the base to return the offshore balance despite these countries and essentially ending U.S. presence in the Middle East with 8 years should be preferred course. And the plan diverts military resources to Russia and China. Saga Food 21. The U.S. military pullout from the Middle East is a reorientation of Washington's political posturing against Russia and China, according to analysts invited. The U.S. is trying to reduce their footprint in other parts of the world, limit the number of Americans, and we need them in the Pacific. And the affirmative reorients U.S. priorities towards China and Russia and avoids Middle Eastern instability. Malley and Feiner 18. An administration can't prioritize everything. Time spent invested in terrorists comes at the expense of China and North Korea. The U.S. counterterrorism posture affects how Washington deals with other governments. Washington's willingness to criticize governments is hindered by the fact the U.S. depends on them. Such countries have learned to extract concessions. And removing U.S. presence from the Middle East improves U.S. power projection by ensuring long-term resources and fiscal stability. Blackton and Porter 21. The U.S. is overstretched and needs to come back by rebalancing maintenance. The U.S. shoulders the most commitments despite its energy and resources current deficit levels. The U.S. economy military buildup and triggers boom and bust cycle. This leaves open the possibility of another fiscal crisis. This would induce battles over resources, collision between defense expenditures. Washington faces more hostile external environment, which makes power protection harder. Drawing down on the Middle East will be one oops road to readjusting fiscal imbalance. Middle East played a central role in the Great War on Terror. Not only does Washington repeatedly fail to get its way, clients and allies have finally infringed on our interests. And the most rigorous empirical evidence concludes that U.S. troop withdrawal reduces instability. All of their evidence is speculative or prone to omitted variable bias. Avery et al. 18. Researchers observe what happens to the U.S. withdraws troops because withdrawals are endogenous instability. This has left little rigorous empirical evidence. We address the problem by looking at the effects of troop reduction that are caused by exogenous factors. Our findings were pressed. The most direct evidence to date the withdrawal of U.S. troops resulted in no change or decrease in the observed level of instability, offering support for restraint. And Middle Eastern instability is inevitable. The Berea Plan prevents the U.S. from getting pulled into Middle Eastern war. Sweeney 20. Leaving the Middle East will constitute a fundamental shift in strategic thinking. Additional instability certainly regions feature the strengths of the are adequately addressed in revolutions result of patterns that constitute dependence on the frontier models and suitable lasting change in the Middle East. The best of U.S. observed from afar during out of withdrawal leaves smaller, more vulnerable U.S. deployments amidst growing instability. All right, and let me grab some water, and then I will be ready for class. All right, Nick, whenever you're ready, I am.
All right. Okay. Let's start with the terrorism advantage.
Okay.
Which piece of evidence, or like, sorry, why or how do terrorists get nuclear weapons?
Yeah, so that's the Adami and Bakashimi evidence from 2021, and it cites a plethora of warrants. First, it talks about how there's a lot of insecure countries in the Middle East that terrorists could sort of take nuclear materials from, and it cites the example of ISIS and Al Qaeda taking radioactive and nuclear materials from power plants. It also talks about how some insecure countries have relationships with terrorist groups, so there's a likelihood of them presenting it as a gift. And then
Okay.
it also talks, okay.
Yeah. Can I? Sorry. Can I cut you off there?
Yeah, of course.
Where does the terrors? Where do terrorists have to use nuclear terrorism to spark a nuclear war?
I mean, anywhere. My argument is
Okay.
that if terrorists use a nuclear weapon, it will be met with reactions.
Why? Who does the government strike back against if terrorists use a nuke?
Right. So the Barry's evidence gives a couple of warrants. It talks about how there could be some sort of miscalculation where you misperceive who launched the nuclear weapon. It also talks about how governments would initiate selective strikes against those terrorist strongholds. And then some allies will get drawn in, and the entire region will lead to a devastating nuclear war.
Okay. Counterbalancing.
Okay.
How many troops have to come home before the counterbalancing advantage is solved sufficiently?
It just has to be all U.S. combat troops.
Which piece of evidence says that it has to be all U.S. combat troops?
I would argue that's my Sweeney evidence that talks about withdrawing U.S. combat troops is what allows us to pursue a strategy of counterbalancing. That's the solvency advocate. Also, right, like I don't think I need to provide a hyper specific brink on this argument when I have four pieces of solvency indicating that the
Okay.
plan trades off with counterbalancing.
Uh, all right, that's fair. Which piece of evidence says the United States wants to pursue counterbalancing in the SQUO?
That's the Ahmed evidence. It talks about how the U.S. is recalibrating its foreign policies, and it's sort of having a pivot to Asia and Russia, as well as the Saga flu evidence that talks about how empirically the United States has diverted resources from the Middle East towards Russia and China, as well as the Blagden and Porter evidence that talks about how the current strategy is unsustainable. So the United States is just going to have to choose one.
Okay. Does the affirmative withdraw troops from Africa?
Um, I mean, I just say that I withdraw all combat troops. There are some troops that are combat troops, I believe, in African countries.
Okay, cool. That's all I need for cross X. 4 minutes
Okay.
of prep starting now. All right, stop prep. We got 208 left. I'll throw that in the chat here. So.
Don't worry, Jared will hold you accountable. He won't forget.
That's
I
exactly
will.
right.
When you stop prep before uploading your document, Nick, where's the doc?
Oh, I'm getting it. I'm sorry. I should have read your paradigm a little closer, I guess.
It's not like this is the 90th time you've debated in front of me.
I know. I'm sorry. Four off, solvency, terror, counterbalancing.
All right, just give me 1 minute. Okay, solvency, terror, counterbalancing.
Yep.
All right, I pull up my timer. I am ready whenever you are, Nick.
Okay, and please give me some kind of indication if I'm unclear or I'm going too fast or whatever, or my Wi-Fi cuts out, so that I can adapt accordingly. Otherwise, if nobody stops me now, I'll assume we're ready to get started. Awesome. First off is topicality. Our interpretation is that the affirmative must remove 20% or more of the counterterrorism operations conducted by the United States, and substantially means at least 20% words and phrases in 67. Substantially refers to the number of tenants engaged in the production of goods or commerce means that at least 20% of the ability to be occupied with tenants to engage. And curtail means to take away some part, not the whole of operation. The Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary 12. To make less of it cutting away over some part of our executive branch. And violation. The app only removes troops from 40% of current counterterrorism operations. They are engaged in 12 out of 85 countries. See the Savelle map. Spell it on 21. Insert the graph there and fuse to refer 1. Predictable limits. Allowing teams to remove combat operations from specific regions increase the size of the topic 20-fold. It means the big teams will just change what country they curtail operations in every turn, and everyone else will have to play catch up. Means the negative is always one debate ahead and behind on the action. 2 is ground. They spike out a core negative ground like allies just had fill in DA, politics DA, and hedge DA by being strategically small. And that guts fairness and competitive equity by creating a race to the margins of the topic. This also guts topic education. You should vote on topicality for fairness and education and prefer competing interpretations. Reasonability forces judge intervention and nullifies any impact to limits. Second option is the pick. The United States federal government should withdraw all permanent combat troops for counterterrorism operations in Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, prioritizing troops in active combat zones. And it competes. It only withdraws troops from Middle Eastern countries specified in the Solvency Advocate. It doesn't withdraw from Africa, which means any permutations or severance and a reason to reject the team justifies spiking out a negative counterplans, which kills fairness. And it solves the entire advantage. One internal link is about nuclear sites in the Middle East having poor defense capabilities, which means that the counterplans are able to resolve those questions. And advantage 2, they point me to Sweeney. Sweeney just says we need to get out of the Middle East to be able to resolve it. The impact of solves that advantage 2. And yes, troops in Africa, U.S. shifting there now. Trying to fill in Bain in 21. The Lord Guard of the Blank Gun, 1,000 troops, Africa, American, taking U.S. war efforts all the way up in the Middle East, U.S. increasing the operating countries like Somalia, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Iraq, run down there, 6,000 American troops across Africa, 35,400. Under the night, U.S. military, the Chinese also hanging Africa to establish overseas military base in 2017. Bill's first base in the region, far from U.S. forces. No direct knowledge has been announced ground. Troops have been routinely used by militants, and U.S. has 13 permanent bases in Africa and over a dozen others. Africa plans to expand that mission to the squad. Turks and 20 bases will launch for offensive military operations. The U.S. military is probably network more than a dozen African countries. Massive enduring bases in Africa. The Pentagon defines enduring as the foreseeable future. 29 bases located in 15 different countries. The archipelago of 15 enduring locations. Africa seeking allies actively seeking enhanced presence and primary expansion. And the future of the presence of U.S. commandos where he came to widespread notice in 2017. And the defenses were also hardened. Troops strength market yield markedly increased. And those bases in troops get counter-terrorism missions. Turks and 20. The U.S. military carried out over the 36 game operations activity in Africa. They had 119 African planning documents that the U.S. force will continue to conduct counter VEO focused activity. Africa has been making the case with bases and militias run the integral. And third off is the fill in DA. U.S. security cooperation key to check Chinese influence in Africa. Now is the key time. Different one in Harrison 8-4. The United States engages far more African security chiefs than China. Chinese engagement may be an inclination point. The United States plays the bill on decades of personal engagement, global power competition in Africa is about showing up Beijing's political interaction, telling comparison to equivalent U.S. engagement. The U.S. should seize the new areas strategic competition, deep ties with African security chiefs, and U.S. security cooperation is the central bulwark against Chinese influence in the region. Hess in 1118, the most immediate copies of the region and power maintaining U.S. president's influence of their security and security, especially small intel, continue to blow out diplomatic, economic, and military involved by the United States. Will be other countries that consistently proved to be a linchpin of the U.S. counterterrorism operations with American financial military support is strategically vital to maintain security, stability in the strategically vital region of the Horn of Africa. The United States must counterbalance on Chinese influence by focusing on increasing diplomatic, economic, military engagement with the countries of the Horn of Africa and ensuring those relationships remain mutually beneficial to the United States. Continue to build bulwark, stability, and allies, nation counter Chinese influence in the Horn. and otherwise they direct military ports and bases in the region, which escalates to conflict. Phillips in 12.5. The report raised requests like the Chinese warship will be able to refit opposite the East Coast in the U.S. without setting up alarm bells. The White House and Pentagon have great power skirmishing reflects the rise between Washington and Beijing, thus arguing about the status of Taiwan. China says that the hypothetical is the origin of 19 men of the U.S. finds self-maneuvering to try to block China from projecting military power from one of the overseas bases most significant U.S. military useful. The old still in the Atlantic coast of Africa. The U.S. wants to counter Chinese military around the world. Energy, American long that's along.
Cutting out,
By
Nick.
the be any ever used by Chinese, use the Chinese bill more for military purposes, according to U.S. official. The reporters of Congress, the U.S. Pentagon said China is likely to consider African bases in Kenya, Tanzania, and Angola, and U.S.-China war goes nuclear. Holland 17. Washington changes the United States are playing the bully. The U.S. has foreign military bases around China, is deploying any swings in South Korea, Japan, posing threat to Beijing nuclear turns to lead to a nuclear war. Be very difficult to figure out whether missile missiles were targeting command centers to China nuke. Behind U.S. sensibility to the danger side, Washington may not be able to dictate the power. It's kind of that's immense military power. The outside of the war, we go nuclear. That also straight turns the counterbalancing advantage. And fourth officer, this admission is on board with the tax credit packages to encourage energy transitions and climate progress in the 12. They get split from BBB now. Simolis Roy 124. Democrats will be last chance to get the heating the plan legislation come up with a series of tax credits and then the transition from fossil fuels mentioned in favor of that chunk of the bill over the rest of climate changes. Thing is one thing we could probably come to agree with much as anything else. Biden believes that part of that could be saved, salvaged, and planned is unpopular in Congress. Bipartisan support for missions in Africa and the affirmative moves. Church in 20. So obviously the activist President Africa is found to fear for in Congress. These personnel installation critical role. Graham R. and couldn't see that and was all additional likely because the political influence of like China and even the reduced packages of historic and effective measures to stop climate change grounded all in 11 to 18. The bill back better single greatest federal legislative actually climate change $1.75 trillion package proposed historic investments done in the United States involved in global efforts to address the countries in the bed. So-called climate change, greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. This could be the best chance Congress has prevent those catastrophic impacts of climate change and warming and impact filter for all their scenarios. Wars, food shortages, migration, flows, and security threats are exponentially worse on a hotter planet. Swing in 15. Environmental stress creates social idle insecurity, result in conflict, security, migration, conflict, climate change increases the number of poor people alive, reducing the resource base, emerging health, water sharing, human well shaking, conflict, pollution, relations with security, going affecting more frequent other events, around some other affecting agricultural productivity, sea level rise setting, developing countries, climate change, thermal fly, poverty, literacy, institution, infrastructure, tagging, health care, resources, climate change, likely to face these problems, and solvency. Your author concedes the troop withdrawal causes conventional arming, nuclear proliferation, and increases the likelihood of war. 80 in 2018. Withdrawing forward deployed U.S. troops increase stability and stability. The questions of the hard current strategy should make this very difficult to answer. We find U.S. troops withdrawals do not cause greater conflict withdrawals at all times. So the behavior such as conventional arming, nuclear proliferation, and diplomatic initiatives that could affect the future likelihood of war. And go to the terrorism advantage. Nuclear terror will literally never happen. Too many checks and not enough incentive. Mueller in 18. Ever since Al Qaeda used box cutter to hijack airplanes on alarms to warn the radicals on the terrorists, whether they make it over nuclear up to Friday Tower terrorists or groups that exist only limited desire to go nuclear, less progress developing with a bomber requires a series of risky actions, trusting the collaborative required transporting materials and having machine gun and then moving out of the position. All while hiding in a vast global secure surveillance and looking for trying to disrupt such activities of nuclear nations that security their weapon very seriously. And your authors concede terrorism is rare and doesn't leave the region. They have to change. They had to change their study methodology because of insufficient estimates. We read yellow. Cattleman in 19. Terrorism is relatively rare event, and specific instances of Al Qaeda attacks are even more infrequent. Hence, the data do not resemble a normal distribution. Thus, OLS estimates will produce ineffective and inefficient estimates. The frequency of terrorist attacks, the increase in the distance from Afghanistan increases reflects the difficulty mounting long distance attacks. Many groups are located in and around Afghanistan and the Middle East in general. And the counterbalancing, or third, their internal link to this is that they steal from Middle Eastern nuclear power plants, but they have not established which Middle Eastern nations build nuclear power plants or which terrorist organizations are able to solve them. They say that Al Qaeda and ISIL have stolen nuclear waste. That means that the impact should probably already be inevitable, and can't solve. Also, they can't solve for terrorists that are already indoctrinated by hating the United States, which is what their evidence talks about. The counterbalancing cyber. Or top level, their uniqueness and link evidence isn't very good. They don't explain how they decrease spending or focus enough to be able to resolve U.S., China, Russia, and no bright line on when technological capabilities expand in Russia and China to be able to beat the United States. The third argument we're going to make is that they don't have the trade-off argument that funding is what is just trading off from China and Russia now, and cyber war with China inevitable, but won't spill over to broader conflict. Townsend 19. China's unlikely to do anything with critical infrastructure that would interfere with long-term strategy. China's eating map model, understand anything currently involved, espionage with that. China's below with a low cyber war attempting to stay under the radar. I didn't read the Lindsay 15 evidence. Process.
Got it. Thank you. Status of the counterplan.
Conditional.
Okay, what are the net benefits to the counterplan?
We think politics and China fill in.
How is politics a net benefit?
Yeah. Our terse evidence indicates that pulling out of the Middle East is popular, or it's pulling out of the Middle East alone is popular, whereas pulling out of Africa is severely unpopular.
Okay, let's go to that piece of evidence. Okay. Where does it say that it's popular to pull out of the Middle East?
I guess it doesn't make. We can read two in our evidence that it's popular to pull out of the Middle East, or that it doesn't affect politics to pull out of the Middle East. But the terse evidence says that pulling out of Africa is uniquely unpopular.
All right, that's fine. So then let's talk about this specifically, the China disad.
Yeah.
So your Internal link. So where is this like where are these military ports going to take place?
The Phillips evidence indicates that China's pursuing them in a lot of countries. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, the
Okay,
United
which
States, places like
countries?
Kenya, Seychelles, Tanzania, and Angola.
Okay, so those are places in. Okay, so no, are there any places in the Middle East?
We say that China fill in Africa is uniquely bad. It makes the delineation that like a base built in
Uh,
Africa is what creates like Chinese capabilities to expand conventional warfare closer to the United States.
all right, that's fine. Let's go on to topicality.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Savile evidence says the U.S. conducts counterterrorism in 85 countries, but it says the United States only has combat in 7 countries, airstrikes in 7 countries, etc. 127E programs in a handful of countries. What are the number of countries that the actual areas of the resolution fall into? Because it's certainly not 85.
We say that the resolution reads substantially curtail counterterrorism operations in one or more of the following areas, which means you have to curtail counterterrorism operations more broadly on
Okay, so I
20%
have
of
to
the
do
85.
things outside of those topic areas. I have to be extra topical per your interpretation.
No, we think that you can affect the topically designated countries with things like
Hmm.
AUMF apps or drone strikes apps probably meet the burden of like 20%.
Wait, what? But you won't answer my question about how many places actually have 127 EAFs, combat apps, drones, and airstrikes, because Savol says it's only about 20 countries,
Right.
right?
We think you need to be 20% out of the 85 countries. That is the
Okay,
interpretation that the negative is sticking with.
okay. So I need to reduce things like training and assistance that aren't part
No,
of the areas mandated in the resolution. That makes
we think
sense.
that you
Thank
need
you.
to we think you need to reduce 20% of all counterterror operations.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. I will go ahead and start prep now. It's sent, and I've stopped prep at a 111. All right, so the order will be topicality, it'll be terror, counterbalancing, solvency, then it will be the counter plan, and I will have theory. You can float on a separate sheet or the counter plan. Then I will have the, let's see what I have in the order in the doc. Okay, the China disad and then the climate politics disad. Let me just grab a sip of water. Okay, so anybody not ready? All right, I will go ahead and get started. First of all, on topicality, reject their interpretation. It was really clear in cross-sects that the SAFL evidence is talking about things outside of the scope of the areas of the resolution. With the 85 countries, these specific categories of the resolution only are constitute about 15 or 20 categories of the resolution. That leads to extra topicality, which is really bad and unfair because I could do things totally unpredictable, which sets the stasis for stable ground. And I meet because I curtail sufficient, at least 20% of counterterrorism, and I meet. And reject their interp. It's nonsense. How does one substantially curtail areas like the AUMF and counter interp? Curtail is to slow, restrict, or stop. I restrict and stop. Vocabulary.com, no date. Curtail is to slow, jump, or restrict, or stop entirely if I'm making them curtailing their cake eating. And then I meet their definition of substantially under the actual interpretation of the resolution. You should also reject their interpretation because substantially modifies curtail, which means that I just have to curtail a substantial amount, not engage in a substantial amount of counterterrorism. For context, their definition assumes to make less or removing will be less, and moving target most counterterrorism operations we don't have a ton of info on because they're confidential. So we should just look to the parameters of the resolution. And they're also going to be exploding moving targets because they lead to vague AFs where we're not really sure what AFs are. They're also going to be over limiting because they only allow for one or two AFs of the topic because we have to curtail such a substantial part of the topic, those 85 countries. And vote AF on reasonability. Vote AF if you think we made an interpretation of the resolution. This gives an AF a chance to keep the plan and debate substance, to voice a race the bottom under competing interpretations paradigm, and don't vote on potential abuse. It's intervention and subjective depending on the judge. Let's go into terror. I'll concede their defense. I'm not going for this scenario. Then on counterbalancing, the United States is beginning the process of counterbalancing against the United States in the status quo. However, when Russia and China feel that they've ascertained regional hegemon status, they're more likely to lash out or miscalculate against the United States. That leads to a laundry list of impacts. All line by line their responses. First, they said that the uniqueness and link evidence are very bad, but the Ahmed evidence is very clear that the United States is beginning to engage in a strategy of offshore balancing, which thumps their disads. However, it's not particularly effective and it needs to recalibrate. The Pine evidence talks about how the United States needs to reduce its military presence. They've conceded 3 solvency cards: the Sakafu, Malley, and Feiner evidence, and the Blagden and Porter evidence, all that say the United States' current strategy is unsustainable and it will reorient resources and time towards Russia and China. That's the solvency for the advantage. That's why I don't need to win any of these tech modernization arguments. Then they never say that there's never a trade-off in funding, but I say that there's a resource trade-off, which is the Sakafu evidence. Then you can extend the Mills evidence. Nuclear war leads to extinction. I'll concede the defense on cyber, and you can extend the EMP attacks. That leads to extinction. They have totally conceded the Russia scenario. Even if they're straight turning the China scenario, Russia's going to outweigh because Russia's mobilizing on Ukraine. That makes it makes escalation more likely. Let's go into solvency. They just indict the Avery at all evidence, and they read this unhighlighted part, but that part says it's unconclusive and it's just unsure about those portions. But best analysis suggests that troop withdrawal does not increase instability. Then let's go on to the pick. First theory. Interpretation: negative should not be allowed to read conditional counterplans that include the plan while removing counterterror from specific geographic locations. In this case, they pick out of Africa. Reasons: prefer A strat skew. 2 reasons. 1, Moodslow ACM unfairly faces double turns. In order to answer the pick adequately, we have to answer case. Perms the biggest structural checkback, which becomes impossible. We're not doing one part of the plan. 2 picks allow them to read a low quality TA that the AF will beat every time without the counterplan. That leads to poorly researched debate, which is uneducational. B, predictability. 2 reasons. 1, there are 195 countries in the world, and their interp justifies picking out a city, states, etc. Their interp leads to an infinite number of unpredictable adversaries, which skews fairness. 2, topic predictability. The community has the option for country-specific topic, and we voted against it, making this strategy unpredictable. Vote out for fairness in education. Debate: balance is key to keeping a sustainable and educational event. Fairness skews collapse any research value. Dropping the debater is key. Severing the position doesn't resolve AR abuse and punishes the AF for testing whether this is good debate practice. No solvency. The offshore balancing advantage specifically talks about how the United States needs to reorient its time and resources towards China and Russia, which can't happen when we're still engaged militarily in Africa. And U.S. troops in Kenya are terrible. They're incompetent and inflammatory. Given snuff 20. Al-Shabaab fighters destroyed an American military base. The portion of airfield with Americans said they'll settle right for the security lapse. A new and complex question during military mission. More than 5,000 troops in serve in Pentagon and withdrawal. Hundreds of counter-Russian China that making doing quick work. And empirical data finds U.S. military is increasing instability and violence in Africa. Indicts Africa. Filed Scene 18. U.S. military slash democracy and governance funding the consequence of the military mission takes it in forefront. Exacerbate government vulnerability targeting scripts specified influence communal tensions. U.S. military engagement in partner countries falls long-term instability, increasing the partner military crew using data from monitored and countries altered the balance power. Let's go into the fill in this set. Non-unique offshore balancing is inevitable. Crossplay Ahmed, the U.S. is slowly adopting a strategy de-emphasizing the Middle East and prioritizing Russia and China. Turn, resource trade-off. Crossplay Suggle the U.S. military pools reorients resources. Turn, time trade-off. Classify Mali and Fighter, the U.S. can only invest so much time in responding to Russia and China. Turn, fiscal instability. Crossplay Blagden and Porter, the U.S. is overstretched and needs to rebalance its finances. Otherwise, the economy will deteriorate. Its current strategy is unsustainable. They say China fill in. A, the AF protects the U.S. from dangerous incursions to the homeland, which is more likely to become existential. B, China fill in reduces the threat because the they are overextending themselves and less likely to achieve moral hegemony. C, moral hazards caused by mildly and finer MENA regions often take advantage of the U.S. They're more likely to take advantage of China. In disinvestment in combat troops leads to greater success and assistance message, helps emissions, help local countries. Factor 19. Counterterrorism missions place more emphasis on circuit force from traditional allied units and assistance to counterterrorism operation greater office. Small footprint both foster the will of local allies take ownership. Let's go on to build back better. Climate initiatives are unlikely to pass, but if not, it's not bad if they don't. January 27. It's a full statute attempt to break 11 Republicans' votes, especially Republicans have unified in opposition. Best case legislation Republicans put in record of voting against policies to help the midterm attempts pull together a bill to justice commented chunk. Unlikely possible death test their base the cause Republicans obstructionist bringing touch to the floor. They're given the accountable. And the plaintiff's fund is a strategy against China. Senator 22. From the Biden and Senator consensus in favor of opposition to be bipartisan majorities remain to Germany influence the U.S. Cut the card there. And even if withdrawal isolates fringe members of the Congress, Manchin supports Manchin 21. U.S. Senator Manchin in the state of in nearly 20 years to bring American troops home. He needs to do everything possible to recoup American access to resources. That he's the sole key vote. Liberty 21. Manchin delivered the final blow. Manchin announced a no vote, and ensure the bill did not have a path forward in the Senate. Cut that last card at the Senate.
All right. I've got 208 left, starting now.
Madeline, is this Saha 19 the only card you didn't read?
Sorry, let me see exactly. I did not read the Yobogo at all and the Byman evidence on the China base. And then I got to the Leber evidence and I cut that at Senate on Build Back Better. If you want, I can send a clean doc.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, of course. It's sent.
All right. No new cards.
What's the order?
We're gonna do the counter plan with a pick theory on top. Politics, China fill-in, counterbalancing.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Okay, is anybody not ready? Awesome. Counterplan theory, counterinterpretation. We get to pick out of regions of the world that checks back against a lot. We get to pick out of regions of the world that checks back against a lot of their offense. But we're gonna read a few standards here. The first standard why our interpretation is good is negative flexibility. It allows the negative to respond to the affirmative in multiple ways. Otherwise the affirmative always just goes. Otherwise the affirmative always just goes for terrorism bad. You don't get to pick specific instances where it's good, which means we have to depend on a wholehearted which means things we have to defend like wholehearted bad positions. The next argument is the T to test the affirmative. We say that the affirmative solvency mechanism on both both advantages internal links is just about the Middle East, which means that it picks out of Africa is sufficient to be able to solve. The third argument is real world education. Counterterrorism policy is not overarching the entire world. We have nuanced ways we do it, i.e. counterterrorism combat in Africa is an example of counterbalancing against China, whereas in the Middle East it's not, which means that only our pick is able to do real world education and nuance. That outweighs their interpretation. They say strats you because the permutation is the only way to check back against counterplan. We say you have to win a marketable solvency deficit. That's probably better. That's probably better to test the affirmative scholarship. They say that pick was a low quality dissent. We're going to straight turn this argument. We say the affirmative always beats the dissent on we outweigh because we read more extinction scenarios than you, and the 2NR collapses. And always go something that the 2NR collapse doesn't cover specifically. Only the counterplan allows for specific region dissents to compete, which is our education argument. They say predictability that we just pick out of individual countries. No, our interpretation is you got to pick out of regions, which is how counterterrorism is applied in the real world. They say that the community voted against it. That's us. We're going to straight turn this argument too. That means that specific countries and specific regions is a neg argument, not an aff argument. That's why the community rejected that resolution. They said they don't read a permutation on the counterplan, it would be severance because it severs out of the Middle Eastern stuff. Go to the counterplan. And you can cross-apply reasonability from the T-flow on theory. If we provide a reasonable interpretation of debate, that should be sufficient for you to not vote on the counterplan. We'll concede that for Madeline's 1AR. The counterplan. The counterplan solves the affirmative case. We say that the counterplan removes troops from the Middle East, which solves the counterbalancing advantage. They try to point you to three pieces of solvency evidence from the 1AC, but command F. None of them talk about removing from Afghanistan in any substantial way. All of their pieces of evidence say that removing from the Middle East is necessarily key for counterbalancing, which means that the counterplan alone is able to resolve the affirmative. You should view counterplan solvency through the lens of sufficiency. If we win that we solve a sufficient amount of the F's internal links, that should be sufficient for you to vote on a 1% risk of on the risk of the China fill-in disadvantage. The line by line, they say we can't solve time and resources or Russia. We say that yes, we can solve time and resources. We repivot combat operations, the resources being spent on Middle East to Africa, and to Russia, and the ones using Africa are already a bulwark against China. That's going to be on the dissent flow. They say Kenya bad. A few arguments here. One, it's not responsive. Even if the combat operations in Kenya are bad, they are key to our internal link of cooperating with Kenya's military to prevent them from accepting Chinese cooperation. They say that it's destabilizing. Again, not responsive. We say that it doesn't matter if it's destabilizing. This doesn't have an impact out. We say it's more important to prevent China from getting a military base in Africa. Go to the politics dissad. They try to straight turn the dissad. We say the counterplan solves. They've not made it read any comparative link evidence against Africa or the Middle East. We have said Africa is popular, which means we access any kind of straight turn on this argument too. The China fill-in dissad. Extend the China fill-in dissad. We say the China fill-in necessarily outweighs. They have conceded the China fill-in causes United States nuclear war because as China builds bases in Africa, the United States gets threatened, which means that we lash out against China and China responds because they feel cornered. We say that escalates nuclear conflict. They have conceded the Howland piece of evidence. We say that outweighs the affirmative case on time frame. They have not given you a time frame for when EMP or nuclear technology gets faster on Russia or China or when they think they can beat us. But we say that China fill-in happens almost immediately post the plan, which means that even if you buy that we don't solve all the affirmative, you can solve all the affirmative. You can vote on the dissad outweighing. They say non-unique that repivoting is inevitable. That just takes out the that takes out the affirmative argument, not the negative, because we have made a time frame distinction. They say that resource trade-off, but we answer that on counterplan. The resource trade-offs are all about the Middle East. Their evidence says that most of combat troops are in the Middle East, which means that the resource trade-off should be sufficient. They have not made any actual numerical claims, which means you should be highly skeptical. They say time trade-off. We say that it's fucking different people doing the collaboration in Africa than people would be counterbalancing Russia. We say that that argument is nonsensical. They say fiscal. They read a turn. They say fiscal instability. They try to cross-apply Biden and report that say the U.S. is overstretched, but again, this argument doesn't have any warrants why Africa is uniquely key. The next you can extend that China fills in the status quo. The Hess piece of evidence says that only United States security commitments acts as a bulwark against China's invasion of Africa, and you can extend the one NC piece of evidence that says that China is specifically trying to place military bases in the United States now, which means that it's key to be able to fight back against it. They say that They say Renfrew says that investment is key to successful assistant missions. We say that assistance probably gets rolled back by the app because it fractures the security alliances and means the military workers don't want to work with us. Imagine us telling the African nations that their troops have to be the only one that go die fighting terrorism, but don't worry, we'll direct them. We say that upsets security, which means they're more likely to go to China. Yeah. You should vote on 1% risk of that. The advantage proper. They have not answered our time frame arguments here. That there is no bright line in the affirmative when Russia and China overtake the United States, which means you should probably vote on 1% risk that the AF outweighs on time frame, or the counterplan outweighs on time frame.
All right, I will take my remaining 249. Okay. The order is going to be the politics dissad, then it will be the counterbalancing advantage, the counterplan, and then the fill-in dissad. Okay?
Can I get that again?
Yes, of course. It will be the politics dissad, the counterbalancing advantage, then it's going to be the counterplan, and then the fill-in dissad. I confused myself with counterbalancing counterplan, so but that is the right order.
That's what threw me off too. Sorry. All right.
No, you're fine. Okay, anybody not ready? There are several incredibly easy ways to vote affirmative in this round. Nick has made too many concessions. The first is on the politics disad. They kicked out of it wrong. They say that the disad solves the link. However, the specific Manchin piece of evidence that I read says that Manchin supported withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's specifically going to be areas in the Middle Eastern region, and the lesser evidence says that it's key. That says that is key to check back against the Build Back Better, and that's going to solve climate change. Outweighs in a couple of ways. One, climate change is a risk multiplier. Two, it outweighs some probability since it's conceded. But let's go on to counterbalancing. They made one response to this advantage in the last speech, which they said that they made a time frame argument, but they conceded my probability argument says that Russia is more likely to mobilize against the United States. They're actively mobilizing on the border of Ukraine, which means that they are a much more probable ally for us to diverge into conflict to. It's also greater magnitude because Russia has more news. They have not appropriately answered this scenario, which says that the withdrawal allows the United States to effectively counterbalance and respond to threats. But let's go on to the counterplan. They have poorly answered offense of the counterplan. First, you can extend the Gibbons and Neff evidence. It says that the U.S. military is incredibly ineffective in African states like Kenya. In fact, they've done such a bad job that they've been attacked by terrorist organizations and increased instability. That means that countries in the Middle East are much less likely to want to work with the United States. Also, instability is going to derail from any sort of partnerships. And they also, you can extend the Feldstein evidence. It empirically looks at the United States engagement in the Middle East and Africa and 189 other countries and says that military troops increase the probability of things like coups and instability. Obviously, when military troops are increasing instability, that's going to lead to a net reduction in cooperation, as well as increase the risk that there's some sort of escalation in the region, right? These are two reasons that Nick has poorly answered. They just say it doesn't apply, but it certainly applies in disparages partnerships. But the disad's also not going to, the counterplan also isn't going to solve case, which I'll get into on the fill-in disad. On the fill-in disad, they made a bunch of new arguments in the last speech that certainly were not in the 1 and C. I read all of these cards and cross-applied them in the last speech, and they didn't answer them. First, you can extend the Saga flu evidence that talks about a resource trade-off. The United States needs to prioritize all of its resources, not just some of them, to counter Russia and China, because some of them are in Africa. Then they conceded all of my defense. The counterplan can't solve that. Then they conceded all of my terminal defense that talks about how China fill-in is actually not a bad thing. A, because the AF protects the U.S. from dangerous incursions of the homeland, which are more likely to be existential. B, because China fill-in reduces the threat on the U.S. because they're overextending themselves, which means it's good if the United States pulls out of everywhere and China begins engaging in smaller regions. And C, moral hazards. The Malley and Feiner evidence says the MENA countries often take advantage of the United States, so they're more likely to take advantage of China, which is going to impair China's leadership capabilities and make it harder for them to escalate. Look, the counterbalancing advantage outweighs. Obviously, they can't solve the disad, and they have poorly answered my turn to the disad about resource trade-offs. Good rounds, Nick.
Good debate, Madeline. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.